You never forget the first time you see it happen, the flicker in someone's eyes when certainty collapses, the sudden pause mid-sentence, the way their fingers fidget just a fraction too long over the glass of water as if they're suddenly unsure whether they were thirsty a moment ago, or if they just needed something to hold on to. It doesn't look like much from the outside: a glance, a stumble, an awkward laugh, but if you've been around the game long enough, you know the truth. That is the moment the ground beneath them shifts. That is the precise second when they start doubting themselves, and once doubt takes root, you own the soil it grows in. The calf was crowded that afternoon, but the noise didn't bother me. I've always liked busy places for delicate work. The clinking of cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, the constant hum of half-heard conversations, all of it creates the perfect camouflage. You can plant a seed in someone's mind, and they'll never know it came from you. Across from me sat Daniel. He was sharp, well-dressed, and very sure of himself. That last part was his weakness. He liked to believe he was immune to influence, that he could read people, that his intuition was always on point. Men like that are easier to dismantle than they realize. I didn't start with confrontation. That's what amateurs do. Amateurs announce themselves: here I am, and I'm challenging you. But the real way in is through the side door, the one they don't even see until it's too late. So I began with a story. Not about him, about someone else entirely. I met a guy once, I said, my voice casual, as if this was just another coffee conversation. Brilliant man, always got everything right. Until one day, someone asked him a question, and he couldn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he suddenly wasn't sure if he knew. Daniel sipped his coffee, a polite listener, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, like he was trying to decode whether my story had a hidden meaning. Good, that was the first nudge. The funny thing is, I continued, that doubt stayed with him. It didn't matter how many times he got the right answer after that. He kept remembering the one time he hesitated. It was like a crack in the glass, invisible from afar, but always there. By now, I could see it: the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders leaned back as if creating distance, while his mind leaned in. He was replaying his own moments of hesitation, scanning through memories without meaning to. That's the beauty of planting doubt. You don't have to name it. People will do the work for you. I moved to the second phase. This is where you weave reality with their own perceptions until they're not sure which is which. You ever notice, I said, lowering my tone, how sometimes you're so sure you remember something, and then someone tells you it didn't happen that way, and for a split second, you're lost? Daniel chuckled, a forced sound. Sure, I guess. Everyone's had that. I nodded, but didn't let him settle into agreement. Right, but what if it happened often enough that you started questioning everything you remembered? The words hung between us. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes dropped to the table. That's when I knew the hook was in. When you're setting the trap, you never rush the kill. That's another mistake rookies make: they push too hard too soon. Doubt isn't a hammer blow. It's water on stone. You keep it steady, you keep it subtle, and eventually, the rock gives way. Tell me, I asked, were we supposed to meet here at 3 or at 2:30? He frowned. 3, really? I tilted my head. I thought you said 2:30 in your message. No, I'm sure I said 3. I pulled out my phone and scrolled slowly before putting it back without showing him the screen. Guess I remembered wrong. I didn't have to show him anything. By leaving the possibility open, I let his mind do the damage. Was he right? Was I? Did it even matter anymore? The conversation drifted to other topics, but I could tell he wasn't fully there. That's the mark of a successful opening move, when the other person is still trying to hold on to the thread of certainty while you've already loosened it. When we stood to leave, Daniel hesitated before shaking my hand. His smile was polite, but there was something else in his eyes now. A question he wasn't ready to voice, and that's how it always begins. Not with a fight, not with a win, but with a seed. A seed they'll water themselves until it grows into something that consumes them. Daniel didn't realize it yet, but by the time we parted ways that afternoon, the game had already shifted to his territory. The seed was planted, the soil fertile, and now it was only a matter of letting it grow. People imagine manipulation as an aggressive sport: confrontation, deception, force. In truth, the most devastating plays happen when the other person thinks they're still in control. Over the next week, our paths crossed more than usual. Not by coincidence. Of course, coincidence is the lazy man's explanation for what the sharp player calls positioning. I happened to join the same networking event he'd arved for. I accidentally ran into him at the lobby cafe of his office building, and each time, I left him with something small. Not an accusation, not a threat, just something. The first was a misplaced compliment. You always remember the details, I told him as we shook hands at the networking event. Funny though, last week, I thought you mentioned you weren't sure about the time. He blinked, trying to place the reference. I could see him scanning for the memory, only to realize he wasn't certain anymore if he'd been wrong or I had. He laughed it off, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. The second was silence. At the cafe, I let him talk about his latest deal without interruption until I suddenly stopped responding mid-story. Just a pause. Not hostile, not distracted. Just stillness. Long enough for him to notice. Long enough for him to wonder if I'd caught something in what he said that wasn't quite right. Then I smiled faintly and changed the subject, leaving him to replay the moment on his own time. Doubt works like humidity. You don't notice it at first, but it clings to everything. By the end of that week, Daniel's messages had changed. He used to write in confident bursts, all exclamation marks and clipped decisions. Now his texts arrived slower, peppered with "I think" and "I'm pretty sure." He was still playing the part of the decisive man, but the hesitation had leaked in, and then came the dinner. It was his idea, an attempt, I suspected, to reassert himself. He picked an expensive restaurant, one where he knew the staff by name. When I arrived, he was already at the table, jacket off, wine ordered, the picture of ease. "Good to see you," he said, smiling just a little too hard. I was thinking about our last chat. You've got a way of getting into people's heads. I tilted my head. Do I? You do. He leaned in. I'm not so easy to read, though. There it was, the challenge. It was almost endearing. Almost. The main course hadn't even arrived before I found my opening. He mentioned a mutual acquaintance, someone he'd met last summer. I let it pass, waited until he was halfway through describing the meeting, then interrupted gently. Wasn't it spring? I asked. He frowned. No, summer. I remember. The weather was. He stopped. Actually, maybe you're right. I said nothing more. That was enough. Because in that instant, I'd forced him to replay the memory and realize he wasn't sure. That small uncertainty was a thread, and once you pull one, the others begin to follow. Dinner ended on friendly terms. But as I walked away, I knew he would be replaying that moment long after. Doubt doesn't fade when you go home. It follows you. It sits at your kitchen table. It watches you from the corner of the bedroom while you try to sleep. The next day, I got a message from him. Just one line. Weird question. Did we ever talk about that deal in March? Or was it April? I smiled when I read it. He thought he was double-checking a detail. What he didn't know was that the detail didn't matter anymore. The real shift had already happened. He was no longer looking outward for certainty. He was looking inward and finding cracks. That's when the game changes. Because once a man starts questioning his own memory, his own instincts, his own sense of what's true, you don't have to attack him at all. He'll do it himself, and I had no intention of stopping him. By the second month, Daniel's transformation was visible to anyone paying attention. The man who once spoke in bullet points now wrapped his thoughts in ellipses. His phone calls ended with, "Let me double-check and get back to you," more often than with decisions. He was losing his edge, not because I'd stripped it from him, but because he'd started handing it to me piece by piece, without realizing it. The real beauty of this stage wasn't in the obvious mistakes. It was in the micro-fractures. The moments so small no one else noticed, but Daniel felt them like splinters under his skin. It started with the emails. One morning, I forwarded him a document, something harmless, a market analysis we'd both already read. I added a single note. Interesting how the dates don't quite line up, right? They did line up, of course. Perfectly. But I knew he wouldn't stop himself from checking. And once he'd checked, he'd check again, wondering if maybe he'd missed something the first time. By the third check, it wasn't about the dates anymore. It was about the gnawing feeling that he was capable of missing something at all. By the end of the week, he was cross-referencing old files against each other, looking for inconsistencies that didn't exist. But the real push came when I decided to stop being the one planting the seeds and let the room do it for me. At a meeting with his partners, I didn't challenge him directly. Instead, I asked a casual, almost offhand question. "Daniel, didn't you give a different projection in last quarter's call?" The numbers he'd given then and now were identical. But by the time he'd pulled out his notes to confirm, I'd already moved the conversation forward. I didn't need an answer, I just needed the silence that followed, the sideways glances from two of his colleagues, the subtle shift of weight in their chairs. It was enough. The moment you make a man feel he has to prove he remembers something, you've already told the room that maybe he doesn't. From there, it snowballed. Daniel began catching shadows that weren't there. He'd step out of his office to find two co-workers whispering and assume they were discussing his last email. He overheard a laugh in the break room and convinced himself it was about a mistake he hadn't even made. He started calling meetings to clarify points no one had questioned, sending memos about ensuring consistency where no inconsistency existed. The others began to see him as jittery, overcautious. That's the thing about paranoia, it doesn't just hurt your reputation, it rewrites it. One night, close to midnight, he called me. His voice was low, tight. You ever get the feeling someone's trying to undermine you? I let a pause hang there before answering. Why do you ask? Because I think. No, I know someone's messing with me. Little things. Conversations I don't remember having. Files I thought I signed off on but didn't. Or maybe I did. His breath caught. It's like they're moving pieces around when I'm not looking. Who do you think it is? I asked gently. He hesitated. That was the crack I'd been waiting for. If he named someone now, I'd have him chasing the wrong ghost. And if he didn't, he'd keep looking. Either way, the real game was no longer about me doing anything at all. It was about him trying to outplay an opponent that didn't exist. Or so he thought. The twist came sooner than I'd expected. 2 weeks later, Daniel made his first real blunder. He sent a financial forecast to the board with a decimal error, one that made the company's projected profits look dangerously thin. When a board member questioned it, Daniel doubled down, insisting the numbers were correct. They weren't. And when the error was exposed, it wasn't just a correction. It was confirmation. In their eyes, the whispers about him losing focus suddenly had proof. Daniel didn't know it yet, but the walls had begun to talk and they weren't speaking his language anymore. By the time winter rolled in, Daniel had stopped looking like a man in control and started moving like someone being chased. The cold wind outside seemed to echo the chill inside him. Every conversation, every email, every passing glance in the hallway felt laced with suspicion. He no longer trusted his own memory, his own judgment, and most importantly, his own allies. He thought he'd found his saboteur twice already. First, it was Simon from finance, quiet, observant, always the one taking notes in meetings. Daniel cornered him with accusations about misfiled reports and mismatched versions of documents. Simon proved, calmly and convincingly, that nothing had been altered. The second time, it was Leela from operations, quick to smile, but quicker to recover numbers Daniel fumbled over. She had airtight evidence for every point he challenged. Both encounters left Daniel with the same conclusion. Either they were innocent, or they were far better at this game than he was. That's when I decided it was time to let the pressure valve hiss. Too much paranoia without resolution can make the prey unpredictable, desperate. I needed him focused not on escaping but on walking straight into the final snare. I gave him a breadcrumb, a subtle, almost invisible slip in a project update. I accidentally sent him an attachment mislabeled, referencing an internal strategy that didn't exist. Anyone else would have shrugged it off. But Daniel, he pounced. 2 hours later, he called me. His voice was sharp again, tinged with the old Daniel decisive. Sure, I know who it is, he said, and I have proof. The beauty of power plays is that proof is often just belief dressed in a suit. I let him tell me the story. How he'd traced the file history, spotted the same login credentials on 2 suspicious updates, and linked them back to a single person. Who? I asked, knowing the answer he'd give. Evan. From strategy, perfect. Evan was ambitious, a little arrogant, and had once contradicted Daniel in a board meeting. The grudge was believable, but Evan was also completely uninvolved in my moves. This was Daniel's self-made villain, the final ghost he'd chase before the lights went out. The confrontation was almost theatrical. Daniel arranged a private meeting with Evan, blinds down, voice steady at first. He laid out his evidence, expecting Evan to crumble, to confess. But instead, Evan laughed, not nervously, not defensively, but with genuine disbelief. You've lost it, Evan said flatly. You're seeing patterns in shadows. The words hit harder than any denial could. Daniel's face tightened. He looked at me across the table because I was there too, the silent observer, invited as the neutral witness. I tilted my head just slightly, enough for him to catch, and in that moment, I knew he understood. It's not the big betrayals that break a man. It's the realization that the knife was in your ribs long before you ever thought to look down. Daniel's gaze shifted. I saw the questions forming. Was it you? How long? Why? But I also saw the exhaustion. He wasn't sure he wanted the answers anymore, and that's when I made the final move. I didn't gloat. I didn't confess. I leaned forward, placed a hand on the table, and said quietly, "Maybe it's not about who's against you, Daniel. Maybe it's about who's still with you." I let the words hang, ambiguous enough to sound like comfort, sharp enough to feel like confession. From that day on, Daniel stopped fighting me. Not because he forgave me, but because he finally understood the truth Machiavelli would have carved into his own seal. It's not the strongest who survive, Daniel. It's the ones who can make others choose sides without ever declaring war, and I'd already chosen the sides for him.